The driver opens my door, and the raw, late November Connecticut air slaps my face. I stand for a moment on the crushed gravel of the circular driveway, looking up at the house I haven't stepped foot in for exactly 10 years. Clark Manor. It's not just a house. It's a statement, a sprawling $12 million testament to my family's legacy of industry, ambition, and carefully concealed cruelty. Through the antique, lidded glass windows, I can see the warm, golden light of crystal, chandeliers spilling onto the manicured lawns. The annual Thanksgiving gathering is in full swing. I see silhouettes moving, heads thrown back in laughter. A booming guffaw rises above the rest, my brother Brandon. Of course, my fingers tighten around the cool, worn leather of the portfolio I'm carrying. Inside are documents meticulously gathered, legally ironclad, and worth infinitely more than this mansion. My hand, steady and unadorned, except for a single discreet platinum bracelet, pauses on the heavy brass doorknob. 10 years. A full decade since I walked out of this house with nothing but a packed suitcase and a heart full of cold, hard resolve. I was dismissed then as the quiet one, the afterthought, the daughter who simply didn't matter in the Grand Clark family narrative. I straightened the jacket of my charcoal suit. It's Savile Row, bespoke, the kind of quiet luxury that screams wealth to those who know, but whispers nothing to those who don't. Not that anyone inside would recognize the craftsmanship. They only understand the language of loud, flashy brands and diamond-encrusted watches. My quiet power is a foreign tongue to them. I'm not here to reconnect. I'm not here for forgiveness or for a tearful family reunion. I'm here to reclaim what was stolen from me, not just money or position, but the very recognition of my value, a value my own grandfather saw in me, and that they so ruthlessly tried to erase. Through the window, I spot my father holding court, gesturing with a crystal tumbler of whiskey while Brandon nods eagerly beside him, the perfect heir apparent. My mother stands nearby, her smile as fixed and fragile as porcelain, her fingers wrapped so tightly around her wine stem her knuckles are white. And there's Savannah, Brandon's wife, posing for selfies in a blood-red dress that probably costs what most people make in a month. The knob turns under my hand. The warmth and the noise of the house spill out, and with it, a memory, sharp and unwelcome, rises UNBIDDEN. It was Christmas dinner 10 years ago. The air in the dining room was thick with the scent of pine needles from the ridiculously oversized tree and the simmering resentment that was a staple at every Clark family holiday. I was 22, fresh out of business school with honors, full of ideas and naive belief that my education might finally earn me a seat at the table. The topic was Creston Systems, my grandfather's company, which my father now ran. Brandon, who had been given a senior VP title as a graduation present, was proposing a massive expansion of the manufacturing division. "We'll double our output within 18 months, he announced, beaming at our father, seeking the approval he always received. I had spent the last week analyzing the proposal, running numbers, studying the market trends. "Have you secured the supply chains for that kind of scale-up?" I asked quietly, my voice sounding small in the cavernous dining room. "Our primary supplier for the microservos is already at capacity. A 50% increase would be a stretch, let alone 100. The table went silent. Brandon's smile tightened. My father, Donald Clark, slowly placed his fork down. The sound echoed like a gunshot. "What was that, Bryony?" he asked, his voice dangerously low. I cleared my throat, forcing myself not to shrink under his gaze. "I'm just saying, the logistics don't support that aggressive of a timeline. If we expand production without locking in our supply chain, we risk massive delays and defaulting on contracts." "It could damage the company's reputation," Brandon scoffed. "She doesn't know what she's talking about, Dad. This is about bold moves, not timid little spreadsheets. Your bold move has a 70% chance of failure based on current market data. I countered, my own voice rising slightly. Grandfather always taught us to mitigate risk, not to gamble with the company's future. The mention of my grandfather was a mistake. My father's eyes turned to ice. He slammed his fist down on the mahogany table. The crystal glasses trembled. Your grandfather is not here, he boomed. I am. And in this family, we do not question leadership. Brandon has a vision. Your role is to support it, not to criticize it from the sidelines with your little college theories. He stood up then, looming over the table, his face a mask of cold fury. If you are not contributing to the forward momentum of this family, Bryony, then you do not get a voice. It's that simple. He delivered the words with the surgical precision of a man who knew exactly where to cut to cause the most damage. I looked around the table for support. My mother stared intently at her wine glass. Savannah was examining her manicure, and Brandon was smirking over the rim of his bourbon glass. That was it. That was the moment I understood. It wasn't about my ideas being wrong. It was about me having ideas at all. In their narrative, Brandon was the visionary heir, and I was the quiet, bookish daughter, the sparer, the one who didn't fit. That night, as freezing rain pelted against my car windows, I packed everything I owned into 2 suitcases. I left a simple note on my perfectly made bed. You're right, I'm not contributing. So I'm leaving. No dramatic goodbyes. No tearful confrontations. And just as I expected, no one tried to stop me. I drove away from the golden glow of Clark Manor and headed south toward an uncertain future in Austin, Texas, with nothing but $3,000 in my savings account, and a promise to myself I would build something of my own, something so successful, so powerful, that they would never be able to dismiss me again. Now, 10 years later, the foyer smells exactly the same. Beeswax, lemon polish, and the faint, crisp scent of old money. Conversations pause as I step inside, heads turning, eyes widening in recognition. Then the chatter resumes, but at a slightly higher, more nervous pitch, my mother's eyes widen in genuine shock. My father's narrow with suspicion. Brandon detaches himself from a conversation with one of the company's board members and saunters toward me, a smug proprietary air about him. Well, look who decided to grace us with her presence after a decade, he says, his voice loud enough for everyone to hear. His eyes do a quick, dismissive flick over my simple charcoal suit, then land on my wrist. Nice watch, he says with a smirk. Department store having a sale. The watch on my wrist is a Patek Philippe Calatrava. It costs more than his car. The suit is tailored to perfection. The single platinum bracelet is from a private jeweler in Geneva, but I don't correct him. His ignorance is a tool I can use. Hello, Brandon. My voice emerges, steadier than I feel. Happy Thanksgiving. He frowned slightly, thrown off by my lack of defensiveness, by the quiet confidence that wasn't there when I left. He expected the timid little sister he remembered, the one who would stammer or blush. He doesn't know what to do with the woman standing in front of him. Just then, Martha, our family's cook and housekeeper for 30 years, appears with a silver tray of drinks. Her face, lined with age and wisdom, breaks into a smile of genuine warmth when she sees me. Miss Bryony, she says, her voice a soft, welcome sound. Welcome home. She offers me a crystal tumbler from the tray. Your favorite, Macallan 25, neat. My fingers tremble slightly as I accept the glass, but they steady as I take a sip. The whiskey burns pleasantly, a familiar fire warming me from the inside out. Martha remembers. Of course she does. In a house full of people who saw me as an accessory, Martha was the one who saw me. My father's voice booms from across the room, shattering the moment. Brandon, we need to discuss the Thompson account before dinner. He beckons my brother over, his gaze sweeping right past me as if I were a piece of furniture. My mother hovers nearby, her porcelain smile fixed, clearly uncertain whether to approach me or to follow her husband's lead. Savannah doesn't even look up from her phone. Just like that, I'm invisible again. Excluded from the pre-dinner business conversation, dismissed before I've spoken a single word about my own career. I watch them huddle near the door to my father's study, Brandon gesturing enthusiastically while my father nods. They have no idea who they're dealing with. They have no clue that the woman they've just ignored is the sole owner of NovaBridge Systems, a tech firm that has quietly become one of their biggest competitors in the data security sector. They have no idea that the portfolio I'm clutching contains documents that will not just give me a voice, but will make my voice the only one that matters. I take another sip of whiskey and allow myself a small, secret moment of satisfaction. Their perception of me as the powerless, irrelevant daughter might be insulting, but it is also my greatest advantage. They think I'm still the quiet girl who ran away when things got hard. They're about to learn, in the most public and painful way possible, just how wrong they've been. I linger in the grand hallway outside my father's study, my back pressed against the cool, dark mahogany paneling. I pretend to admire a landscape painting, one that has hung in the same spot for my entire life. Through the partially open study door, my father's voice carries, its timbre low and conspiratorial. "We've kept her out of your grandfather's trust for a decade, Brandon," he says. "One dinner doesn't change anything. She's here for a handout, that's all." My body goes completely still. My breathing shallows. The crystal tumbler in my hand might as well be welded to my palm. Brandon's arrogant laugh follows. She has no idea about the amendments we made after the old man died. Legally airtight. That senile old fool actually thought she'd run the company someday. My father's voice drips with a dismissal that is almost casual in its cruelty. Imagine, he had some delusion that she had a special insight into the business. Thank God. We fixed that particular problem. I remain frozen in the shadows, a cold, clean rage building beneath my composed exterior. Not a single muscle betrays the storm raging inside me. They haven't just pushed me aside. They haven't just written me out of the daily narrative. They have been systematically and illegally erasing me from the family legacy. The legacy my grandfather, William Clark, built from the ground up. The one he specifically wanted me to protect. "I just need to check something in your desk before dinner," I hear Brandon say. I slip into the shadows of a deep alcove as Brandon exits the study, checking his Rolex, a gaudy, diamond-encrusted monstrosity that screams insecurity. When his footsteps fade down the hallway towards the dining room, I move. I slip into the study, the door closing behind me with a soft click. The room is a fortress of masculine power. Dark leather, hunting prints, the faint smell of cigar smoke, and my father's cologne. His massive desk stands imposing beneath a portrait of my grandfather. I look up at the painting, at the kind, intelligent eyes of the man who believed in me. "I'm sorry it took me so long, Grandpa," I whisper. "But I'm here now. I'll fix this." I know exactly where to look. Third drawer on the right, where important family documents were always kept. The lock is new, but a simple desk lock is no match for 10 years of learning how to dismantle complex systems. It takes me less than a minute. The folder's there. Just as I suspected, it's labeled Clark Family Trust, amended. My hands don't tremble as I pull out my phone and begin to photograph each page. Document after document reveals their meticulous, cold-blooded manipulation. My name crossed out. Provisions for my inheritance rewritten to redirect all assets to Brandon upon my father's death. My grandfather's clearly stated intentions, perverted by a series of legal maneuvers signed by my father, with my mother as a witness, dated just 3 weeks after my grandfather's funeral, a time when my grandmother was in the deepest throes of her grief and dementia, and I was too consumed with her care to notice their plotting. Dinner is served in 5 minutes, Martha calls from the hallway. Her voice a gentle warning. I slide everything back into place, replace the folder, and lock the drawer, leaving no trace of my discovery. As I step back into the hallway, my heart is no longer a frantic drum. It is a cold, steady metronome, ticking down the final minutes of their reign. The dining room gleams with an almost offensive level of ostentatious wealth. Crystal chandeliers drip light onto the table, which is set with silver candelabras and fine china that costs more than most people's monthly rent. My father sits at the head of the table, Brandon at his right hand, the king and his prince. Savannah, wearing what appears to be an entire season's worth of designer clothes at once, is live streaming herself adjusting the centerpiece. Perfect lighting for my followers, she murmurs to no one in particular, her face bathed in the artificial glow of her phone. My mother sips her fourth glass of wine, her eyes slightly unfocused. I see now what I missed before. Her drinking isn't just social or casual, it's a coping mechanism. It's survival. My father stands, commanding attention without even asking for it. Before we carve the turkey, he announces, his voice full of self-importance, I'd like to make my annual State of the Company address. Brandon beams, anticipating the praise he is about to receive. Savannah barely looks up from her phone. Creston. Systems has had a challenging year, my father begins, but I am pleased to announce that we have finalized negotiations with a buyer. My fork pauses halfway to my plate. This is news to me. And judging by the shocked look on Brandon's face, news to him as well. The company will be sold by the end of the year to an as-yet undisclosed entity, my father continues, his eyes gleaming with satisfaction. Brandon will, of course, maintain his executive position with a substantial increase in compensation. Brandon, recovering quickly, interjects, not to mention the company yacht I've already put a deposit on. Savannah chimes in, suddenly interested. And my new influencer deals leveraging the Creston connections are already signed. I observe the tableau before me with the dispassionate eye of a strategist. The slight flush on my father's neck betraying his excitement. My mother's knuckles, white around her stemware. The subtle shift of the family accountant's shoulders, angled slightly away from Brandon, a classic tell of discomfort. Everything tells a story if you know how to read it. Most importantly, my father continues, and now he looks directly at me for the first time all evening, his eyes cold and hard. We'll finally be rid of all the dead weight. Streamlined operations. No more legacy entanglements. The message couldn't be clearer if he'd written it in blood on the tablecloth. I am the dead weight. The family legacy, my grandfather's vision of ethical manufacturing and sustainable growth is the entanglement. They are dismantling it all for a quick, massive profit. Brandon raises his glass to my new position as Chief Strategy Officer at the merged company. To innovation, my father says, which from his lips sounds like desecration. Savannah leans toward me, her voice is sweet, syrupy poison. At least now you won't have to pretend you were ever going to inherit anything, she whispers. That must be a relief. Her words are meant to cut, to watch me bleed out right here at the dinner table. But I've spent 10 years building armor they can't even see. To generous deals, my father concludes, his glass catching the light. I take a perfectly timed sip of water, hiding the small, sharp smile that threatens to break through. They think this dinner is their victory lap. They have no idea they're celebrating their own spectacular downfall. As the crystal glasses clink around me, a new thought solidifies. I could reveal my hand now, detonate the bomb right in the middle of their celebration, or I could wait. Let them savor their triumph. Let them toast to their greed and their betrayal. And then, at the perfect moment, I could show them exactly who they sold their company to. Asterisk. The clinking of crystal glasses around the table sounded like a death knell. My father, Donald Clark, lifted his glass, his face flush with victory. To family loyalty, he announced, his gaze sweeping over everyone but me, the foundation of our success. The dinner guests, a curated collection of board members, investors, and their spouses shifted uncomfortably in their chairs, casting pitying, sideways glances my way. They saw the forgotten daughter, the prodigal who returned with nothing, just in time to witness the family fortune being carved up without her. My mother's hand trembled as she raised her wine glass, the liquid sloshing dangerously close to the rim. It was her fourth glass tonight. Speaking of success, my brother Brandon interjected, pulling his phone from his jacket pocket with a pulpit. Flourish. Just got the final photos of the yacht. He tapped the screen, then passed it to the board member on his right, a man named Mr. Abernathy. 52 feet. Custom teak throughout. A real beauty. The phone moved around the table, greeted with the appropriate murmurs of masculine appreciation. When it reached the person beside me, Brandon stretched across the table, his voice loud and dismissive. Skip Bridie. She wouldn't understand the value. Savannah, never one to miss performing for an audience, stood and smoothed her red dress. Family photo for the followers? She chirped, holding her phone at that practiced high angle that makes one's jawline appear sharper. She framed the shot perfectly to capture everyone at the table. Except me. Clark Family Traditions, she narrated for her phone. #blessed. The flash was momentarily blinding. I took another sip of water, the cool liquid a welcome contrast to the bitter taste of exclusion rising in my throat. My mind, a fortress built over 10 years, didn't crumble. Instead, it drifted back to the foundation of my new life, to the place where I had forged myself anew, Austin, Texas, 10 years ago. The heat was a physical presence, a stark contrast to the damp cold of the Connecticut winter I had just fled. My first office for B.E. Quinn, my anonymous, genderless, baggage-free corporate identity, was a barren 20-by-20-foot space above a tequaria that I couldn't even afford to eat at. I had slept on a camping mat behind my desk, showering at a nearby 24-hour gym and living on instant ramen and a burning, all-consuming determination. The doubt in those first few months circled like vultures. What if father was right? What if I truly had nothing of value to contribute? The family lawyers had sent a cease and desist letter threatening legal action if I used the Clark name. In any business venture, it was their final petty act of erasure. The most painful sacrifice came a month in. I needed capital for my first server farm, a crucial investment to handle the data analytics I knew would be my company's backbone. My savings were gone. I had one thing of value left. I walked into a quiet, respectable pawn shop and placed my grandfather's gold pocket watch on the glass counter. His voice echoed in my head as I handed it over, the weight of it a phantom in my palm. Time is the only truly limited resource, Bryony. Spend it creating value. That watch, a piece of my only true family, funded my first server farm. The irony wasn't lost on me. I had to sacrifice a timepiece to buy my company the time it needed to grow. 8-hour days became my norm. When competitors in the data security space slept, I worked. When they vacationed, I expanded my knowledge. Learning to code, mastering market analysis, building my company from the ground up, one line of code, one cold call at a time. I was fueled by coffee, ambition, and the memory of my father's dismissal. All the while, I was quietly, methodically purchasing shares in Creston Systems. I used a series of anonymous shell companies, a tactic I learned from studying my father's own less than scrupulous business dealings. I watched my family's mismanagement from afar, reading the quarterly reports, noting the declining profits, the loss of key clients, the foolish, ego-driven expenditures. Brandon's yacht wasn't his first vanity project. It was just his latest. I saw every mistake, every vulnerability, and I filed it away. My breakthrough came after 2 years of relentless work. I landed a contract with a major aerospace firm, a client Creston had been trying to secure for years. They had been put off by my father's arrogance and Brandon's lack of technical knowledge. I, on the other hand, came prepared. I knew their systems better than they did. I presented a data security solution that was not only more effective, but also 30% more cost efficient. The CEO, a no-nonsense woman named Helen Shaw, have looked at me across the boardroom table. "You remind me of William Clark," she said, "your grandfather. He was a man of integrity. You have his eyes and his mind." That contract put Nova Bridge Systems on the map. Back in the gleaming, ostentatious dining room, Martha appeared at my elbow, setting down the dessert tray. As she leaned in to place a slice of pumpkin pie before me, her hand briefly, almost imperceptibly, squeezed my shoulder. "Your grandfather would be so proud," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the dinner conversation. "He always said you were the only one who truly understood what real value was." Her words straightened my spine. The validation I had never received from my family, the approval I had stopped seeking years ago, came from the woman who had watched me grow up, the one who saw what they had so willfully refused to see. My father stood again, tapping his knife against his glass. The candles cast dramatic shadows across his face as the conversation died down. "I have one final announcement," he declared, his voice booming with satisfaction. "As some of you know, we've been in negotiations with buyers for several months." He paused for dramatic effect. "I am thrilled to announce that Creston Systems has been sold." A wave of murmurs went through the room. Savannah dropped her phone mid-selfie. "What? You promised me the PR division for my brand." Brandon's face flushed a deep crimson. "Dad, we were supposed to discuss the final offers." "This isn't legal." "I'll contest it." My father waved off their protests with an arrogant flick of his wrist. "The deal is done. We received a very generous offer from Evertech Holdings, $57 million. They were particularly impressed with Brandon's strategic vision," he added, a clear lie designed to placate his son. "The deal allows him to maintain his executive position and," he looked pointedly at Brandon, "the yacht." I set down my water glass carefully, the crystal making a soft, clear sound against the linen tablecloth. "Who is the buyer again?" I asked, my voice cutting. Through the chatter, all eyes turned to me. It was the first time I had spoken since the dinner began. My father frowned, clearly annoyed at my interruption. "Evertech Holdings," he repeated slowly, as if I might not comprehend the words. "A major tech conglomerate based in—" I stood up, my napkin falling unheeded to the floor. "That's me." The room froze. A fork clattered against a plate. Brandon's mouth hung open. Savannah stopped mid-text, her perfectly manicured thumb hovering over her screen. My father's eyebrows drew together in a knot of confusion. "What nonsense is this?" he demanded. Martha, with perfect silent timing, re-entered the room with the coffee service. She moved with a quiet efficiency around the stunned dinner guests, but she placed the finest Limoges china cup, my grandmother's favorite, before me first. It was a small act of allegiance, a subtle shift in the balance of power that did not go unnoticed. "Perhaps," I said, my voice steady and clear, "I should introduce myself properly." I reached for the leather portfolio I had brought with me, the clasp clicking open with a satisfyingly loud snap. I am B.E. Quinn, the founder and CEO of NovaBridge Systems. Evertech Holdings is merely one of our acquisitions. I slid the signed merger agreement across the polished mahogany right into the center of the table. The Creston board voted unanimously to accept our acquisition offer last week. The vote was 8-0. My father's face drained of all color as his eyes locked onto my company's logo at the top of the page, a stylized bridge spanning a rising sun. It was the same image my grandfather had sketched on a napkin decades ago for his original vision of the company before my father had transformed it into something bloated and unrecognizable. That's not possible, he whispered, but there was no conviction in his voice. For the first time in my life, I watched certainty drain from him, like water through open fingers. My father fumbled for his reading glasses, his hands trembling slightly. Brandon lurched forward, his face a mask of disbelief. This is corporate espionage. You stole our clients. No, I said, my voice falling into the stunned silence of the room like a gauntlet. I extracted another document from my portfolio and slid it toward him. These are legally executed contracts with former Creston clients who left after your mismanagement. Would you like me to detail which ones abandoned ship after you failed to deliver on 3 consecutive promises of a software update that never materialized? I'll invalidate this sale. My father blustered, his voice regaining some of its familiar thunder. The board would never approve this behind my back. The board voted unanimously, I repeated calmly, producing the meeting minutes, complete, with signatures from all 8 members. They were particularly motivated after Brandon's embezzlement was discovered. $280,000 to be exact. They were quite eager for new leadership. The word embezzlement hung in the air, thick and poisonous. Brandon's mouth opened, then closed. He looked at her father, seeking a rescue that didn't come. In the silence, I heard Savannah's phone drop to the table with a clatter. That's a lie, my father said, but the words were weak, hollow. I removed a small, sleek USB drive from my portfolio and placed it on the table. The forensic accounting report is quite thorough. It details the wire transfers to your son's personal account in the Cayman Islands. Would you like me to play the recording of the emergency board meeting where your own CFO detailed the irregularities? My father looked around the table, suddenly and painfully aware of the dinner guests, his friends, his colleagues, witnessing his complete and utter unraveling. The corporate facade he had maintained for decades was cracking before my very eyes. The doorbell chimed, a clear, bright sound that cut through the tension. Perfect timing. That would be James Harrington, my attorney, I said. Martha appeared at the dining room entrance, her expression serene. Mr. Harrington is here, Miss Bryony. Shall I show him in? Her eyes gleamed with the satisfaction she didn't bother to hide. Please do, Martha. James entered moments later, a tall, sharp man in his late 40s, carrying a slim leather briefcase. He had been my attorney since day one in Austin, taking equity in my fledgling company instead of a payment I couldn't provide. He was another person who had seen my worth when my own family couldn't. He nodded to me before addressing the table. Good evening. I have the final transition documents ready for signatures. Brandon's face was now a pale, doughy white as he finally grasped the full legal implications of his actions. You can't possibly think I'll sign anything. Your signature isn't required, Mr. Clark, James said, placing a document in front of my father. The board's approval supersedes management. In cases of malfeasance, Brandon sputtered. That's slander. I leaned forward, my voice low. It's only slander if it isn't true. Would you like to explain the wire transfers, or shall I? His bluster deflated completely. Savannah, her influencer persona dropped, finally spoke, her voice high and panicked. What about my contract as brand ambassador for the new company? Terminated as of yesterday, I replied, not unkindly. Along with the corporate expense account that funded your Aspen ski trip last month? My father grasped at his last shred of authority. This is my company. I built it from grandfather built it, I corrected him quietly. You were its caretaker, and you failed. Across the table, I noticed my mother's hand. It was steady. For the first time all night, she caught my eye and gave a nearly imperceptible nod. A silent, shocking acknowledgement. Savannah begged to be the face of my rebranded company. Brandon blustered about lawyers. My father stared at the papers, diminished and defeated. He looked up at me with an unfamiliar uncertainty. What happens now? He asked, his voice barely a whisper. Before I could answer, my mother spoke, her voice clearer than I'd heard it in years. Bryony, might I have a word with you privately, after dinner? The request hung in the air, unexpected, intriguing. After 10 years of silence, it seemed my mother finally had something to say. My mother's request for a private word hung in the air, a strange and unexpected note in the cacophony of my family's collapse. After dinner, she had said, her voice clearer than I'd heard it in years. After 10 years of silence, it seemed my mother finally had something to say. My father, his face the color of wet cement, stared at the final acquisition papers that James, my attorney, had placed before him. The pen wavered in his hand. Behind him, I noticed my mother watching, not with the nervous, unfocused gaze I was used to, but with a sharp, assessing look I couldn't quite read. Brandon shoved his chair back from the table with a loud scrape, the sound of his impotent rage. This is ridiculous, he sputtered. I'm calling our lawyers. Savannah, ever the pragmatist, was already on her phone, her voice a low, urgent murmur. My agent needs to hear about this immediately. Breach of contract. Image damages. Only my father remained seated, a king dethroned in his own castle, the magnitude of his failure finally settling on his shoulders like an invisible, crushing weight. He looked up at me, his eyes holding an unfamiliar expression of uncertainty, perhaps even fear. What happens now? He asked, his voice barely a whisper. Before I could answer, my mother spoke again. Bryony, the library, now. It wasn't a request. It was a command. And in her eyes, I saw a flicker of the formidable woman she must have been long before my father's ego had ground her down into silent, alcoholic complicity. I nodded. Of course, Mother. After a decade of being voiceless, it seemed we both finally had something to say. James slid the final document toward my father. This simply acknowledges the transfer of operational control, effective immediately, as per the board's unanimous vote. My father stared at the paper as if it might bite him. You think you can run Creston better than I can? He asked, a last, desperate grasp at his former authority. I know I can, I replied, my voice devoid of triumph, stating it as a simple fact. Starting with reversing the disastrous outsourcing decision that cost the company the Westlake contract. Last quarter, the pen in his hand shook as he finally signed his name, the signature a spidery, broken version of his usual bold script. He pushed the paper back across the table and stood up, his movements stiff and robotic. He walked out of the dining room without another word, without a single glance back. Brandon, who had been hovering in the doorway, watched him go, then turned to me, his face a twisted mask of fury and disbelief. You will not get away with this, he hissed. I'll spend every last dollar I have to see you ruined. Your dollars are no longer your own, Brandon, James interjected calmly. The forensic accounting report has been forwarded to the district attorney's office. Given the scale of the embezzlement, I'd recommend you retain criminal counsel, not corporate. The color drained from Brandon's face. He looked from James to me, then stormed out of the house, slamming the front door behind him with a force that rattled the crystal on the dining table. Savannah, having finished her call, approached. Hey, her influencer mask replaced by a look of cold, hard calculation. My contract as brand ambassador, she began, was with Crestone Systems under your father-in-law's leadership. I finished for her. NovaCrest Technologies has its own marketing team. However, I added offering a small, unexpected olive branch. If you're interested in a charitable partnership for our foundation's new STEM initiative for underprivileged girls, I'd be happy to have my team send you a proposal. The compensation would be a tax-deductible donation in your name, of course. She stared at me, processing the shift from high-paid influencer to unpaid charity spokesperson. After a moment, a flicker of something new, perhaps grudging respect, appeared in her eyes. Send the proposal, she said, and walked out. The dinner guests, having witnessed the complete implosion of the Clark dynasty, began to make their quiet, awkward exits. They offered me hesitant congratulations, their eyes wide with a mixture of awe and fear. In a single evening, I had transformed from the forgotten daughter into the most powerful person in the room. Finally, only James, Martha, my mother, and I remained. James packed his briefcase. The transition team will be here at 9 a.m. tomorrow, he said. Congratulations, Bryony. You did it. We did it, James. I corrected him. Thank you. After he left, I turned to my mother. She was standing by the window, looking out at the dark, manicured gardens. The library? I prompted gently. She nodded and led the way. The library was my grandfather's sanctuary. The scent of old books, leather, and his faint, lingering pipe tobacco was a comforting balm. My mother didn't turn on the main lights, leaving the room lit only by a single, soft lamp on my grandfather's desk. She walked over to the fireplace and stood for a long moment, her back to me, staring at the portrait of my grandfather that hung above the mantel. He knew, she said finally, her voice low and thick with unshed tears. Your grandfather. He knew what your father was, what he would do. I remained silent, waiting. This was her story to tell, and I had waited 10 years to hear it. When I married your father, she began, turning to face me, her face a roadmap of regret. I thought his ambition was a strength. I was young. I mistook arrogance for confidence. Your grandfather saw it from the beginning. He tried to warn me. He said, Donald doesn't build things, Elaine. He just acquires them, and he will acquire you too. She sank into one of the deep leather armchairs, her posture defeated, and he did. Little by little, he chipped away at me. He made me feel small, incompetent. He controlled the finances, the friendships, the decisions. My drinking, as you so clinically observed, wasn't a hobby. It was an escape, the only one I had. Why did you let him push me away? I asked the question raw, the wound of my childhood suddenly fresh again. Why did you always side with him and Brandon? Tears finally spilled down her cheeks, tracing past through her perfect makeup. Because I was a coward, she whispered, and because I was jealous. You were so much like him, she said, nodding at the portrait. You had his mind, his strength, his integrity. Your father couldn't control you, and that terrified him. And it terrified me because I knew he would eventually drive you away, just like he drove away everything else that was good. She took a shaky breath. The night you left, that Christmas, I almost went after you. I have my hand on the doorknob, but he came up behind me and he said, let her go. She's not one of us. She never was, and I let him be right. It is the greatest Regret of my life, Bryony. The confession hung in the air between us, heavy and heartbreaking. It wasn't an excuse, but it was an explanation. He didn't just write you out of the trust after your grandfather died. She continued, her voice gaining a new, steely edge. He did it while he was still alive. Your grandfather had a stroke 5 years before he passed. It was minor, but it scared him. While he was recovering, your father convinced him to sign some new power of attorney documents, just to make things easier. Those documents gave him the power to make the amendments your grandfather never knew. The cold rage I had felt earlier returned, a white-hot fire in my veins. And you knew? You witnessed the signatures. She nodded, her eyes full of shame. I did. I was there. I told myself it was for the best, that it would keep the peace, but I knew it was wrong. She stood up and walked over to a bookshelf filled with leather-bound classics. She ran her hand along the spines, then pulled out a thick volume of Shakespeare's tragedies. She opened it. It was hollowed out inside. From within, she removed a small, ornate brass key. Your grandfather was a brilliant man, she said, her voice trembling slightly. He was a strategist. He knew your father would betray him. He knew he would try to cheat you. The trust he set up, the one they thought they had so cleverly amended, was only part of his plan. It was the public face, the decoy. She held the key out to me. He gave this to me the day before his final surgery. He said, when the time is right, give this to Bryony. She knew what to do. He told me that your father's greed would be his undoing, and that my silence would be my prison. He said that one day I would have to choose. Choose what? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Between my jailer and my daughter, she said, pressing the key into my palm. I'm so sorry it took me so long to choose you. What is this key for? I asked, staring at the intricate design. There's a safe deposit box at the Bostonian Bank on Beacon Street, she said. It's not in the family's name. It's under the name B. E. Quinn. My heart stopped. The anonymous, genderless corporate identity I had created for myself in Austin. The name I thought I had invented out of thin air. How? I breathed. Your grandfather was always 10 steps ahead of everyone, she said with a sad smile. He saw who you were long before you became her. He told me the box contained his real legacy. Not just for you to inherit, but for you to earn. He knew you had to build your own strength, your own power, before you could be trusted with his. He knew you had to leave to find your way back. I closed my hand around the key, the cold metal a tangible link to a plan set in motion over a decade ago. My grandfather hadn't just left me an inheritance. He had left me a roadmap, a test, and a secret weapon. Your father doesn't know about the box? I asked Dot. She shook her head. No one does. Only you and me, and William, of course. We stood in the quiet library, the ghosts of the past swirling around us. The story was so much bigger than I had ever imagined. This wasn't just my revenge. This was the fulfillment of my grandfather's final brilliant strategy. What do you want, Mom? I asked, the word feeling foreign on my tongue after so many years. I want to help you burn it all down, she said, her eyes meeting mine, clear and sober for the first time all night. And then I want to help you rebuild. The next morning, I flew to Boston. My mother, citing a sudden migraine, stayed behind to manage the initial chaos of the corporate transition, a role she took on with a surprising and formidable efficiency. She was no longer the fragile porcelain doll. She was the quiet, calculating queen on the chessboard, finally making her move. The Bostonian Bank was an old, imposing institution of granite and brass. The air inside was cool and smelled of money and time. I presented the key and a copy of my grandfather's death certificate. The bank manager, an elderly man who remembered my grandfather, led me down to the vault without a single question. The safe deposit box was heavy. Inside, there was no cash, no jewelry, no gold bars. There was something far more valuable. The first thing I saw was a letter addressed to me in my grandfather's familiar, elegant script. My dearest Bryony, it began. If you're reading this, it means two things. First, that I am gone. And second, that you have become the woman I always knew you would be, strong enough to find your way back, and clever enough to reclaim what is yours. I am sorry for the trials you have had to endure. I knew your father's character, and I knew he would not make it easy for you, but I also knew that strength isn't given, it is forged. And you, my dear, have been forged in fire. I had to pause, my vision blurring with tears. The company, Creston Systems, as you know it, is a shell. The letter continued. After your father took over, I began to quietly move my most valuable assets, the patents for the original microservo designs, the deeds to the undeveloped commercial, land next to the old factory, and my personal portfolio of tech stocks into a separate privately held entity. The company you just acquired is the public face, the one I left for your father to mismanage. The real value, the true heart of my life's work, is in this box. Beneath the letter were the documents, patent certificates, property deeds, stock, certificates for companies that were now giants in the tech industry, purchased decades ago with his uncanny foresight. And finally, the original, unamended, and legally ironclad charter for the William Clark Foundation, a charitable trust he had established with me named as the sole executor. Its stated purpose: to fund innovation and support entrepreneurs who lead with integrity. The total value of the assets in that box was nearly 4 times that of Creston Systems. He hadn't just protected my inheritance. He had built a separate, untouchable empire for me, waiting for me to be ready to claim it. There was one more item at the bottom of the box. A small velvet pouch. Inside was this gold pocket watch, the one I had sold in Austin. Tucked beside it was a note. I believe this belongs to you. Time is a limited resource, Bryony. You've spent yours wisely. I sat on the floor of that cold, quiet vault and wept. Not with sadness, but with the overwhelming weight of a love so profound, so strategic, that it had reached across time and death to guide me home. Asterisk, I flew back from Boston, not as a ghost seeking revenge, but as an executor of a legacy I was finally ready to claim. The small brass key felt heavy in my pocket, a tangible link to my grandfather's brilliant posthumous strategy. He hadn't just left me a fortune, he had left me a blueprint for justice. My mother met me at the private airstrip in a town. Car, a quiet act of solidarity that spoke volumes. For the first time, she wasn't waiting for me in my father's shadow. She was standing beside me, ready to face him. He's been calling nonstop, she said as we settled into the plush leather. Seats, Brandon too. They're panicking. The board has frozen all non-essential executive expenditures pending your review. Good, I said, looking out at the passing Connecticut landscape. Let them panic. The woman who had left this state 10 years ago was a scared girl running on fumes and righteous anger. The woman who returned was the head of a multi-million-dollar corporation, armed with irrefutable evidence, a formidable legal team, and now a secret, untouchable fortune that dwarfed her family's wildest dreams. They thought they were playing checkers. My grandfather had taught me how to play chess. And it was time for the checkmate. That evening, we convened in the library at Clark Manor. It was our war room now. James Harrington had flown in from Austin. Nancy Hoffman and Sophia Rodriguez joined us. My mother, clear-eyed and sober, had Martha serve coffee, not wine. I laid out the documents from the safe deposit box on the large mahogany desk. The patents, the deeds, the stock certificates, and my grandfather's letter. As my legal team reviewed the contents, Their professional composure gave way to expressions of stunned admiration. "My God," Nancy whispered, looking at the original. "Charter for the William Clark Foundation. He set this up as a completely separate legal entity. It's untouchable by Creston's creditors or by your father. He created a shadow empire," James added, a slow grin spreading across his face. "He left your father a company to run and you an entire economy to command. This isn't just a trust. It's a masterpiece of estate planning." My mother, who had been quietly observing, finally spoke. "William knew Donald's character. He knew his greed had no limits. He told me once, a man who only values what he can sell will eventually sell his own soul. He was protecting Bryony, but he was also protecting his life's work from being desecrated. Our strategy session was brief and decisive. We had them. On multiple fronts: Brandon's embezzlement, my father's fraudulent amendments to the decoy trust, and now the revelation of a true legacy that made their squabbles over Creston systems seem pathetic in comparison. We don't need to fight them anymore," Sophia concluded. "We just need to inform them of the new reality. We present them with two options: a quiet, dignified exit, or a very public, very messy, and very expensive legal battle they have absolutely no chance of winning." "And the fraudulent documents they tried to use to evict me?" I asked. "We hold on to those," Jake said, a predatory glint in his eye, "as leverage. Should they choose not to cooperate, we hand them over to the district attorney. Forgery attempted, theft by deception, harassment, the list is long." My mother nodded. "Let me talk to your father first," she said, looking at me. Alone, it's time he and I had a conversation without lawyers present, a final one. My mother met my father in the formal living room, the one reserved for guests and uncomfortable conversations. I waited in the library, the door slightly ajar. I couldn't hear the words, only the murmur of their voices. My mother's was low and steady. My father's started loud and blustering, then grew quieter, punctuated by long, heavy silences. After an hour, she emerged, her face pale but resolute. "He will sign the papers," she said. "He will retire, effective immediately. He understands that his position is untenable." "And Brandon?" I asked. "Brandon is on his own," she replied, her voice cold. "I told Donald that our protection of him ends today. The consequences of his actions are his alone to bear." The next day, the consequences arrived. The DA, armed with a forensic accounting report from the Creston board, formally indicted Brandon on charges of felony embezzlement and corporate fraud. His photo was on the local news, not as the dashing heir to a corporate dynasty, but as a common criminal in a tailored suit. He made bail, but his assets were frozen. The yacht he had put a deposit on was repossessed. Savannah, ever the survivor, filed for divorce within the week, releasing a statement to her followers about her shock and profound disappointment, and her commitment to using her platform to advocate for corporate transparency. My father, faced with the undeniable proof from the safe deposit box and the threat of his own prosecution for trust fraud, quietly signed all the transition documents. He officially retired from the company his own father had built, citing health reasons. The deal we offered him was simple. He would receive a modest, fixed pension from the foundation, enough to live comfortably but not lavishly. In exchange, he would relinquish all claims, stay silent, and disappear from the corporate world forever. He took the deal. They sold Clark Manor a few months later. It was too big, too expensive, and too full of ghosts. They moved to a smaller house in a neighboring town, a place without a grand library or manicured gardens. My father, stripped of his power and prestige, became a recluse. The day after my father signed the papers, I walked into the CEO's office at Creston Systems. It was my office now. I had the heavy, ornate furniture removed. The hunting prints came down off the walls. I replaced the massive, intimidating mahogany desk with a simple, modern one. And on the wall behind it, I hung the framed portrait of my grandfather. My first act as CEO was to call an all-hands meeting. As I stood before the employees, I saw a mix of fear, skepticism, and a faint flicker of hope in their eyes. "My name is Bryony Clark," I began, "and my grandfather, William Clark, founded this company on a simple principle: to build things of value and integrity. For the past decade, this company has lost its way. Today, that changes. Today, we return to the foundation my grandfather laid. I laid out my vision. We would no longer be just Crest-On Systems. We would be Novacrest Technologies, a name that honored both the new and the old." I announced the immediate rehiring of the entire R&D division that Brandon had fired to fund his lifestyle. I unveiled the Legacy Project, a new initiative to revive my grandfather's abandoned, eco-friendly product lines, updated with modern technology. I reinstated the employee equity program that my father had cut. For the first time in years, the applause in that building was genuine. My mother found her new purpose in the William Clark Foundation. She poured all her energy, her intelligence, and her decades of pent-up potential into its mission. She became a fierce and respected advocate for women entrepreneurs, mentoring young women who, like her, had been underestimated and overlooked. At the foundation's official launch event, she gave a powerful, moving speech, not as Donald Clark's wife, but as Elaine Clark, a woman in her own right. She spoke of survival, regret, and the quiet strength it takes to rebuild a life. She never mentioned my father by name, but everyone in the room understood that our relationship found a new, quiet equilibrium. It wasn't the warm, easy bond of a mother and daughter who had never been broken. There were too many scars for that, but it was built on a foundation of newfound mutual respect. We were no longer jailer and prisoner, or enabler and victim. We were two survivors, two builders, working to create something good from the wreckage of the past. 2 years after that fateful Thanksgiving, I sat in the library of Clark Manor, my library. I had bought the house back at auction, not as a trophy, but as a reclamation. I had renovated it, filling the dark, heavy rooms with light and air, replacing the intimidating furniture with pieces that were both beautiful and comfortable. It was no longer a place of painful memories. It was a home. The doorbell chimed. Martha showed in a young woman, a nervous but brilliant engineering student who was the first recipient of the Clark Innovation Scholarship. As I spoke with her, outlining the internship program we had designed, I saw the same fire in her eyes that I had once had in my own. The hunger to build, to create, to prove herself. Later that evening, my mother and I were having dinner on the terrace overlooking the gardens my grandmother had so lovingly tended. "I received a letter from Valerie," she said quietly, referring to Brandon's now ex-wife. Savannah had, with surprising acumen, leveraged her experience into a successful consulting firm advising brands on ethical marketing. "Oh," I asked, sipping my iced tea. "She apologized," my mother said. "A real one this time." She said witnessing what happened taught her the difference between influence and integrity. She paused. "She's donating a portion of her company's profits to our foundation." I smiled. Perhaps people could change after all. "And Brandon?" I asked. "He's out on parole next month," she said, her voice neutral. "He'll be working at a community center, part of his sentence." We both knew the life he had known was over forever. As the sun set, casting a golden glow over the gardens, I felt a sense of peace so profound it was almost overwhelming. I thought of my grandfather's gold pocket watch, which I had repurchased and now kept on my desk. Time is the only truly limited resource, Bryony. Spend it creating value. I had. I had taken the broken pieces of my past and built a future my grandfather would have been proud of. Legacy, I realized, isn't what you inherit in a will. It's not about money or property or a last name. It's what you build. It's the value you create, the people you lift up, the integrity you refuse to compromise. My family had tried to erase me from their story, so I had simply written a better one. Thank you for listening to my story. It's been a long and difficult journey, but it's taught me that sometimes the greatest strength is found not in fighting, but in building. You don't have to accept the role you've been cast in by your family. You have the power to write your own script, to define your own value, and to build your own legacy. What do you think matters most in a legacy? Is it reclaiming what was taken or creating something entirely new that honors the past while building a better future? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might need to hear that standing up for what is right, even against your own family, is sometimes the most powerful choice you can make. Thank you for listening, and may you find the strength to build what matters most in your own life.